Hey, this is Cam with Blacktail Studio, and this week I make a pretty big table, then I make it really big. Stay tuned. First off, big thanks to Nikon for sponsoring this week's video, and you guys should also be thanking Nikon because they don't even want some annoying ad read where I stare at the camera and talk about how great Nikon is for 60 seconds. They just said, hey, we want to give you some gear, we want you to make a cool video, we want you to show how it works, show what you like about it, and I said, absolutely. So this will be my first video shot in almost 100 YouTube videos not done on my iPhone. So there was a bit of a learning curve learning how to be a real YouTuber for once, but this entire video was shot with the Nikon Z62 and I am really excited to show you guys what I learned. The wood that I'm working with is locally salvaged Oregon black walnut that I got up at Gobi Walnut in northwest Portland, Oregon. And they're pretty much the world's foremost supplier of these big walnut slabs, and these are my favorite style of slabs. These are a book match, which means when you open them up like a book, they form kind of a mirror image of each other because they sat right next to each other in the tree. They are a really cool style. They measured about 144 inches by 25 inches for each slab. And I had some people in my last video, they said, hey, so many of your viewers are international. Can you give metric numbers when you talk about these inches? And first thing I was like, no man, I can't do metric. Who knows how to do that kind of math? And I thought about it and I realized I do carry around a tiny computer in my pocket that can do that math. So anywhere you see inches, I tried to include the metric numbers as well. A lot of you probably know that normally when you're doing a glue up, you run your boards through a jointer, and this gives you that nice, perfectly flat, perfectly 90-degree surface that you're looking for in a glue up. What you might not know is the Festool track saw actually cuts a perfect enough 90 and a sharp enough line that you can do a glue up right off the saw, which is pretty awesome for me in this case because there is no way I can negotiate these giant slabs on a jointer by myself, and probably not even with help. And also, I don't need your judgment on my high water pants. My wife mocks me and asks why I buy such short pants, and I keep telling her that I am still growing, and she tells me that 39-year-old men do not continue to grow, but that is my excuse, and so I don't need to hear it from you guys in the comments because I already hear it from her. I'm going to be using the jointer to make some clamping cauls, and all a caul really is a flat piece of wood or a flat board. I'm using 2x4s from Home Depot, which are shockingly expensive as of May 2021. They are going to do the trick for this, and I will be able to use them again later. A clamping caul out of a 2x4 like this is really only good for about one use since it can start to move pretty quick. The dominoes that I'm going to be using are 12mm by 140mm dominoes, which are big, stout dominoes, and I am using a lot of them. And when I say a lot of them, I mean probably too many of them. And my thought process behind this was one of these slabs was very flat, the other one was just a little bit wavy, and so I was going to use these dominoes to really help line everything up and keep both slabs very flat. And in the end, this worked, but I think I could have accomplished the same thing with maybe half as many dominoes, and this many dominoes also presented some other challenges that you will see here in just a second. This many dominoes made for an awfully sporty glue up. There was really just not enough clamping power for me to push this in, at least very easily. I was able to get it in eventually, but it's something else to think about. I probably didn't need this long of dominoes. I certainly didn't need that many dominoes, but I'd come this far and there was no going back at this point, and I was able to get it. Just make sure you have your glue out, you have your clamps handy, everything right in front of you, because you don't want to be scrambling for extra clamps in the middle of one of these glue ups, because you only have, a few minutes to get everything together and tight. And you can see before I got it all the way snug, I put these clamping cauls, which again, they're just flat pieces of wood, and this is going to really assist in keeping the table very, very flat during this glue up process, because especially with these pipe clamps, is they don't pull perfectly parallel, and when I clamp really hard, they can actually bow that wood. So the cauls are going to keep everything flat, and you'll see here we actually did pretty good when we pulled this out of the clamps. I was actually pleasantly surprised. And this table, you might be wondering on the thickness, is it started off as 8/4, which is really pretty thin for a table this size, so I didn't have any thickness to spare. And little teaser, I have a few tricks on how to keep your table its maximum thickness that I'll share with you a little bit later. You're probably noticing this footage looks much sharper than you're used to for one of my videos, and that is the 4K footage out of this Nikon Z62. It is extraordinarily sharp and it shoots 4K, I believe, up to 60 frames per second. This is 24 frames per second, which someone told me is the cinematic effect. So you guys tell me, is this cinematic enough for you? Anyway, I am just touching up some knot holes there with that tabletop epoxy. It was ready to work with in about 24 hours after that. And now I can get started on these extension leaves. I'm sure somebody has done an extension leaf similar to this. I had never seen it done exactly this way, and I don't want to take credit and act like I created this style because there is nothing new in woodworking. Everything has been done before, but I learned everything through this process through my own mistakes, and it was kind of a cool process. And what I wanted was this extension leaf to look like a continuation of the table without really taking anything away from the table when it's not in use. So I didn't want a bunch of weird brackets or screws in the end of it. And so the first thing I needed to do was make a second book match. And this was pretty straightforward. I didn't use nearly as many dominoes this time. I think I only used 3 on this particular set. And I was just going to glue up this offcut from the end of the slab and form a second book match. This was probably the most difficult project I've taken on in the last 12 months or so. And I don't know if it's because of that, but this is actually the piece that I am most proud of. This is my favorite project of anything I've ever built. And that's saying a lot. I've built a lot of things. So this project was a lot of fun, but man, it was a challenge. And I know right now it doesn't look very good. So I hope you're willing to stick with me while this table comes to life, because a lot of times people will tell me that I remind them of the Bob Ross of woodworking. And I remember watching Bob Ross, and I was constantly looking at some brush stroke he made and thinking, oh, he ruined it. It looked so good up to that point. And then 5 brush strokes later, you're like, oh yeah, no, he definitely needed to do that. That was amazing. So I hope you guys will bear with me while this comes to life. I know it doesn't look like much yet, but it is really, really a cool project and something I'm really proud of in the end. If you decide to try one of these book match tables, remember your symmetry, because one of these slabs was about 25 inches wide from the center point. The other one was only 23.5. So I cut them both down to 23 inches from the dead center. So that way we have a symmetrical 46-inch wide table, and something that would be easier to mess up than you think. Because if you had just an inch off of one slab, it could look absolutely ridiculous and you wouldn't know why the table didn't look good until you did your measurements. So always think of the symmetry. If I am known for one thing on YouTube, apparently it is for awkwardly flipping tables, or I should probably say awkwardly not flipping tables, and this is some of my finest work. You see, I didn't even try right there and decided that I had to go into stall mode. Looking at my phone, nobody was calling, nobody was texting, but still felt like I had to stall even though I work by myself. Anyway, we got up to the point of no return, where this is definitely the scariest part because it's got to come down somehow. Anyway, we eventually got it down, and now I get to tackle all of these low spots. And this is something I'd never done before, and again, something I probably didn't invent, but it was kind of a cool method to get rid of all those low spots without using any thickness of the table. I was pretty fortunate that I still had all of these offcuts from earlier because I had all these patches I had to make, and this wood was going to match the table perfectly because it's from the same table. And there's a rule in woodworking, or at least there should be a rule in woodworking, that you do not throw away any wood following 7 years after a project. And that might sound a little excessive to some of you, but when you have that one project 5 years later and you're able to pull out that Rubbermaid tub full of offcuts and you have the one piece that matches perfectly, you will thank me. And your family and your wife, they might hate me, but all that really matters is that you had the one piece for that one time that you needed it. What exactly I'm doing here might not make sense to some of you out there just yet. And basically what I'm doing is I am fixing, kind of cheating my way to fixing those low spots that the bandsaw cut there. And why you've never seen me do this before is because normally I buy thicker slabs. Normally I start out with 2.5 inch or 3 inch thick slabs for a table like this. These ones started out at just barely 2 inches. So I wanted to finish the table at 1.75 inches. So I really didn't have much wiggle room after planing off those other low spots. So all I'm essentially doing is making a bunch of little patchwork inlays, and these are on the underside. So you're never really gonna see them. All you're gonna see is about a 1/16 to maybe an 1/8 inch at the thickest on the edges of this table. And if I did a good job matching the wood grain, you really won't see them at all. I would consider a ton of hand clamps an absolute essential woodworking tool. As I have a lot of tools that you don't really need, like this electric hand planer. I bought it like 6 years ago, thought I'd use it all the time. Used it like 3 times in 6 years. However, hand clamps, everybody needs a ton of them. So get yourself a bunch of those F clamps, the deep throat ones, the short ones, the parallel clamps if you can afford them. Pipe clamps are a great alternative to some of those more expensive clamps. Just get as many clamps as you think you need, times that by 2, and then keep buying clamps until you just run out of space. So that's the exact number of how many clamps every woodworker should have. Before I got started working with these slabs, they were what you call skip planed, which just means they were surfaced on both sides, but not so far that they removed every single low spot. You can still see that low spot there, the long skinny one in the middle of the table. And this was by design, since we were really trying to maximize our table thickness. We didn't want to remove too much too early, and this final sanding pass was going to remove a little bit more wood. So what we did was leave some of those low spots so we could hopefully maximize our thickness with this very final sanding pass. And here we only removed maybe 1/8 of an inch or so and got to right where we needed. I get so many questions about this shop that I go to in Portland, and if you've ever seen one of my videos, you've already seen me up here at Creative Woodworking in Northeast Portland. But the question I get most of the time is people from around the country that are like, hey, how do I find a Creative Woodworking in my town? And first off, there might not be one in your town. There was actually some guys from Seattle in the shop that saw one of my videos and drove down from Seattle to have their pieces processed, which I know quite a few people from Seattle that actually drive down just to use this shop, because it saves that much time. But if you live in St. Louis or New York or South Carolina, all I would suggest is call around some cabinet shops, because they're going to have a lot of these tools and they might want a little bit of extra money. And if they don't want to let you use their tools, they will likely know who does have a shop that might rent time out to you. So call around some cabinet shops, other woodworkers, social media, all that stuff, and you might be able to find a Creative Woodworking in your town. Now we get to see how I did on the patchwork, and this isn't going to be my finest hour. This is just done with a router. If I was really wanting to be precise, I would have used a router with a little bit more chisel work, but this is actually pretty good, especially from the side when you're really only going to see about a 1/16 of an inch. The center part, this is something that I really want to hide from you guys, but since I don't hide anything, I have to show you everything. I would never do this on a client's table. But for my own table, I would have lost, almost 1/8 or 1/4 inch off this, which was just not an option. It is the underside. You're never going to see it. Still, for a client, I would have just insisted on having thicker slabs. There's no way I would have taken this on for a client's project with such thin slabs. However, it was a table for me, and I knew that I was going to be comfortable with that one low spot on the underside of the table. And I am embarrassed to show you guys. It's probably going to get some hate comments out there about how I halfway did that, but that was really my only option. The dust extraction on this router is actually pretty incredible because of this little plastic shroud that goes around the bit. However, if you try to remove it before the bit stops spinning, you're in for kind of an expensive mistake. Although now I have a dust shroud that I can use to actually see the router bit when I'm using it, and the extraction still works pretty well. One of the things I pride myself on here is that I read and respond to essentially every single question that you guys ask in the comments below. And it's actually gotten to the point when it comes to these C channels that my iPhone knows how to respond to a question, because I have answered this question so many times that someone asks, what do the C channels do? When I write the word helps, my iPhone assumes I'm about to say keep it flat. So that's essentially what the C channels do, is they help keep the table flat. They're not going to fix a warped table. They're not going to keep green slabs flat. But if you have a table that is nice and dry and it's flat to begin with, you put the C channels in there, it's going to assist in keeping it flat. I watch a lot of YouTube, and I don't know that there's anything more frustrating than when I find a video on a topic that I'm really excited to watch, and the first thing the guy says is, hey, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to like, always be sure to comment, that whole spiel. And I'm thinking, you haven't shown me anything. I don't know you. I don't know why I would want to subscribe. I don't know why I would want to like this. You haven't given me any content. So I try to do things a little bit different. I try to wait till I have hopefully earned your subscription, and then it's just a reminder, because sometimes someone will say, hey, don't forget to like this video right after something really cool, and I'm like, oh yeah, I will like this video. So if you do think that I've earned your subscription, I would appreciate it if you would hit that subscribe button. It does help my page out. I really appreciate it. If you don't think I've earned it, I just appreciate the view, and if you really, really think I've earned it, hit that like button. These bow ties are another topic that I get a ton of questions on. And first off, people want to know how to make them. And a couple years ago, one of my very early videos, I made a video on how to make this bow tie jig. And it's not a jig that I invented. I saw it somewhere online and couldn't find a video on how to make it. So I made a quick and easy video on how to cut these bow ties with a simple jig that takes you about 10 minutes and $0 to make. I'll link that in the video description below. The bandsaw method isn't quite as precise as like a CNC, and I've seen some guys do some really nice ones on table saws actually. But the main question I get is, what do they actually do? Are they decorative? Why do you inlay them? Why do you have two of them there? And the fact that I have two of them there is completely decorative. I just like the look of a pair of bow ties for some reason. One bow tie would have completely sufficed. And essentially what they do is this crack coming in from the end grain, I find those ones especially suspect, meaning that they could maybe, 10 years down the line, open up slightly. And inlaying this wedged shaped bow tie is going to prevent that crack from separating any further. So that's all they do, is they prevent the cracks from splitting even further. If you've never done any inlay work before, you might be thinking that it looks super intimidating and like something you could never pull off. And I actually promise you that you can do inlay work if you really want to, because it really only takes two things. It takes sharp tools and it takes some patience. It doesn't even take expensive tools. So if you have cheap chisels, they can get essentially just as sharp as these chisels that I have here. They just might need to be resharpened a little bit more often, or pull out that leather strop like you see me using here from time to time. So now that you know that you can use cheap tools, the next thing it takes is patience. And I hear people say like, oh, I don't have the patience for that. I am not the type of person that can work that slowly. And I look at it this way. It's like the people that say, oh, I can never be a long haul truck driver because I can't sit in a car that long. Until that person has to move cross country, and then they have no choice but to sit in a car for that long. So if you just think of it like this is the job, like it's not going to take 5 minutes, it's just going to take an hour, and that's how long the drive is. That's how long this job is. It's really not that bad. And then mix in a couple tips from the videos like mine or other great YouTube videos out there. It's really not that hard. A couple tips from me, a little bit of patience, and some sharp tools, and I promise you can do inlay work. I always cut my inlays slightly thicker than the slot that they're going in. So if they were completely bottomed out, they're going to sit slightly proud because you don't want them to sit below the level of your table. And even though these were a little bit thicker than the slots that I cut, they actually didn't go all the way down. I started to get a little bit nervous because they were getting really, really snug. And it's not going to hurt anything that these sit, 1/16 of an inch off the bottom of this inlay. They are still going to provide that shear strength, preventing that crack from opening. And here's another one of my favorite tips, is using a little bit of dust mixed in with that wood glue, and that's going to fill any of those tiny, tiny little micro imperfections that your chisel might have missed. Your hole's never really going to be perfect, or at least with me, it's never going to be absolutely perfect. So filling any of those micro gaps with wood glue and a mix of the dust is going to make it look really natural and essentially like a laser cut inlay. Some of you that are really smart might have already figured this out. And if you're looking at this extension wing, you might be wondering, how can he have an extension leaf on each end of the table that's continuous grain if he only cut that piece off of one end of the table? And you're totally right. This is actually only going to be continuous grain on one end of the table. And this is because there was a definite best part of the table. The best 108 inches, the best 9 feet of the table was from one end. And I didn't know that I was going to be able to pull this off. In the end, it actually worked really cool. And I hope you guys stick around to see how well this works. But when I started this, I didn't know that it was going to work. And so I wanted to make sure the focus was to have one perfect, great dining table. And if I pulled off the extension wings, great. So I did have to fudge the other end, and it actually looked kind of cool in the end, but I hope you guys will stick around to let me know what you think of each end of this continuous grain extension wings. Through this process, I learned more and more about this Nikon Z62. Like, apparently it has dual processors. Unlike most digital cameras that only have one processor, this has two, which means it's really, really fast. Also, if you're wondering, I'm using the 24-70 lens, which is why you get that really cool, dramatic, blurry background, but really extraordinarily sharp foreground. This next bit is all about me making things more difficult than they have to be. I could have done just a nice 90-degree butt joint on these extension leaves and it would have been fine, but here's what I wanted. I wanted to kind of click together like a puzzle piece, and I'd never seen this done before. Again, I'm sure people have done it and done it better than me. However, I had to teach myself how to do this using essentially hand-powered tools where I couldn't use a CNC for this. And I spent a lot of time on this. Just one cut, Probably spent about an hour on getting it just right. You can see here, I used the fixed focus point on the Nikon and let that saw come into focus instead of the motion tracking. As I got close, I didn't want to cut too far, so I hand sawed it, came back with the chisel. I wanted this to be perfect, and I got a little spoiler for you is I messed it up, and you'll see here in just a second how I messed it up. Some of you, if you're really smart, might have already realized how I messed it up, but I spent so much time making sure I got it just perfect. I was gonna fine tune it a little bit more. As I was walking up, I realized what I did. Can you see what I did? I made the cut the wrong way. The C channel should be on the same side. So it doesn't fit together. It fits together like opposite puzzle pieces. So I kind of bit my tongue a little bit, went and took a walk around the shop and came back and did it the right way. But now I get to really show off the Nikon features. You see the motion tracking there. I'm using some dynamic zoom with the editing, makes it look like a slider. Starting to get a little bit fancy. I hope you guys don't think I'm getting too fancy, but I had a lot of fun getting this cut the right way and using some of the cool features of the Nikon to do it. And one of the questions someone asked me early on, they said, man, using a nice camera makes me nervous in a dusty shop, and it's completely weather sealed and dust sealed, so there are no issues using it in my dusty shop. Now we get to get into the mechanics of how these leaf extensions actually work, and you'll see some extra threaded inserts in the table, and that was from the Mark I design, which was a thinner, lower profile aluminum extrusion that just wasn't strong enough in the end. So I switched the design to this 15 series aluminum extrusion, which I think is going to be plenty strong enough for Big Uncle Eddie to throw his elbows up on the table and not sag at all. And so I drilled these holes, and these holes are going to do a really good job of indexing it so they can only go in the correct place. So you'll see here, I marked my holes with that, made sure that it was perfectly perpendicular to that table, marked the next hole, and now these kind of flat-headed furniture bolts are going to ride in the T-slots, and if it sits perfectly parallel, it's only going to slide in, perfectly perpendicular, it can only go in perfectly. Did I use the word perfect too much? Anyway, drilling those holes before really indexes it so they can only go in the correct place. And I hope that makes sense, and I'll have some better videos of how these actually work here in a little bit. Something else I had to consider during this construction process is the expansion and contraction of this big wood table seasonally, and the leaf should expand at a similar rate. Also, those bolts are really undersized for those T-slots, so there's plenty of wiggle room to account for any seasonal expansion and contraction. And then since those holes are drilled directly on top of the bolts, I can tighten them down and they get extraordinarily tight. So they are very snug, but still enough room to account for any seasonal wood movement. At this point, I was pretty inspired with the progress. It was actually starting to look really nice. And some of you might be a little disappointed with that seam. I'm actually really pleased with it. It's never gonna look like machined aluminum that just clicks together and that seam disappears. It's wood, and it's a guy like me making the cuts without using a CNC. So that's, I don't know, about as good as I could do. I could maybe do a little bit better on some of the other ones, but all in all, I am really happy with it. And now there was just about 10 hours or so of sanding left on this tabletop, and I will spare you guys that entire montage with just about a 7-second montage of the sanding. And one thing I will never skip is the finishing montage, because this is the fun part. This is my favorite part where you really get to see that grain come to life. This is Rubio Monocoat that I'm using. It's a finish I've been using for quite a while. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but it works really, really well. However, here is the part that I've been kind of hiding from some of you guys because I had to fill in these low spots with patchwork over here. And the patchwork is something that can be really cool. I didn't want to do it on the whole table, so I used it as kind of an opportunity to practice it and something that would make that non-continuous grain section a little bit more artistic. And again, it's not something that I think fits perfectly with the table, but it did a good job of accomplishing what I needed to accomplish. I've always tried to show you guys how I fill these tiny little micro pits in the epoxy using this CA glue and activator. However, my iPhone could never really get close enough, whereas this Nikon can crop zoom a crazy amount because it's a 24.5 megapixel camera, so it can zoom in so far and actually show you guys the detail of what I'm doing for once. I did a quick pass with my 1/8 inch roundover bit and my cordless trim router, and I know I wasn't going to show you guys a bunch about sanding, but I felt like I should show you this one last tip because I don't think I've mentioned it before. On my final sanding pass, I like to switch to a soft pad on my Festool sander, put on this Mirka Abranet mesh sandpaper. I do feel like I get a much better final finish, and I'm using 180 grit here to finish. And here I had a friend, David Allen Designs. He showed up just in time to help me do some table flipping and a little bit of table finishing. And again, I am using Rubio Monocoat. It's a really durable, really beautiful finish that goes on very easily. It can be reapplied in place. Again, I'm not sponsored by them. I'm still waiting. You guys should probably send them several dozen emails and let them know that they should sponsor me, because I do so much promotion of their product. But I do just genuinely like the product, and I haven't found a better one yet. So I am applying the finish here. You basically just buff it on and wipe it off. And here's how it looks. And there's no filter in it. There's no special effects. I don't know how to color grade yet. So this is straight out of the Nikon camera. It looks pretty incredible. This camera also has in-camera stabilization, so you can actually get nice smooth shots on a handheld camera like that. If you've seen my videos before, you probably know at the end of my videos I have a little call to action where I say, hey, if you mention this word, I'll know you made it all the way to the end of the video, and I'll answer all of your questions in the comments first. I've said that too many times that I feel like I can't even count at this point. However, there's always someone that's like, hey, I just skipped to the end of the video and now I know the word. How are you going to monitor these people? And I got those people right where I want them, because this week we're gonna have 2 words. It's gonna be a secret word for all of you people that are watching in the meat of the video, and then I'll do a fake word at the end of the video to see who's actually paying attention. So this week, start your question or comment with just my name, CAM, and I've done that one before, so it'll be unassuming to the people that actually just skipped ahead to the end of the video. So any questions you have, start your comment with my name, CAM, and I'll know you made it all the way to the end of the video. This base was custom fabricated by a really cool company, Wicked Woods Northwest. They are a sawmill and a fabrication shop, and I was very difficult to deal with on this one because I needed it to be so specific, and they said that's what they want. They only want people to come to them for the really specific one-off bespoke projects. So big thanks to Wicked Woods for just absolutely nailing this base, and now it was up to me to nail this stretcher. Nick Saban, the coach of Alabama, says that they don't practice until they get it right. They practice until they can't get it wrong. And I love that motto. And that's a really good lesson for woodworking, is don't do it till you can get it right one time, because then that next cut might be the one where you get it wrong. And so I did the same thing for these practice cuts. I did, I don't know, maybe 15 practice cuts. And by the end, I could actually still get it wrong, but I was getting it right more than I was getting it wrong. So I eventually had to try it on the stretcher. And in the end, it actually worked out. For anybody willing to help, I need a little bit of focus group help from my viewers. And you've probably noticed, if you're still with the video, that this is a really long video. This is over 30 minutes long, and I genuinely don't like videos that are longer than they have to be, but I feel like videos should be as long as they need to be. And I've got a working theory, and that's that 5 years ago, nobody watched YouTube on their television. It was only on your phone. You wanted things that are like a minute long or 2 minutes long. And now I watch it for entertainment. I go in my home gym, I'll put on YouTube now instead of TV, and that's something you would have never seen a few years ago. So I think that it's okay. I look for a video, that's 15, 20, 30 minutes long. However, I would like to know from you guys if you like this longer content, because I feel like if I would have made it shorter, I would have had to cut out some really important stuff, and you wouldn't have understood how this build came together. So let me know in the comments if you support the long content, or if maybe I should keep it under, 15 minutes or so. This piece of walnut had some of the most unique figuring I've ever seen on a piece of walnut, so I just absolutely had to have it. And I think deep down inside, I knew all along that you wouldn't actually see this, especially when you get chairs around a table and it's dark with the shadow being cast directly over the stretcher, but I did like it. And here's what I wanted to show you on the table bases. They actually incorporated some leg levelers that I thought was really cool. In the end, I didn't end up needing them because the floor was flat enough, but it is nice to know that I could throw a leg leveler in there if I actually needed it. That base was extraordinarily heavy. It was made from solid 3/8 inch thick steel plate, so I had to enlist the help of a friend. Also, if you're moving tables around kind of shortly after they've been finished within a day or two, it's a good idea to use some rubber gloves or nitrile gloves like we are using here. And this is big